Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. I'm Steve, and I am joined by Chris. If you're listening on June 30th of 2022 on Facebook and or Twitter, then we are live. And so today we are going to talk about the 2017 film The Pilgrimage, starring Tom Holland, Richard Armitage, and John Bernthal, along with Stanley Weber, who is a great actor. But so thanks for joining Chris of Canada and I again. We are going to slice and dice the movie Pilgrimage from 2017. And this is a movie suggested by Alex the Great, a major benefactor of both the history of the papacy and Beyond the Big Screen. And you can find out how to support both of these podcasts by going on to Patreon or in the show notes, depending on when you're listening. Now, the plot of The Pilgrimage is pretty simple. It's a bunch of Irish monks. They're living the monk life somewhere on the coast of Ireland in the early 1200s. And then a fancy monk comes from maybe Norman England, maybe Normandy, but he shows up at the monastery in order to claim a powerful relic for the Pope in Rome, in which the Pope needs to ensure the success of the next crusade to the Holy Land. And then an adventure ensues. Did I miss anything major there, Chris?
No, that pretty much sums it up. It's a pretty simple plot.
Now, we're going to kind of do this in the classic, at least in classic and Beyond the Big Screen terms, of the Hollywood hates history approach to this movie, as popularized by Scott Rank of History Unplugged and me. We'll share what was good and what we liked, what was not so good, and maybe try to come up with some sort of consensus of whether Hollywood hated history or loved history in this movie. Maybe we'll come up with something else too. And we'll also talk about maybe some ways that we could make this movie a little better. One last thing is that I highly suggest you go back and listen to the extensive series of Irish and Celtic Christianity series I did with Dr. Carly McNamara of the University of Glasgow. That series 117 on the History of the Papacy podcast. And I think you'll very much enjoy that series. And this movie sort of fits into that series kind of inadvertently, at least probably for the filmmakers. So links to all of that again and more can be found in the show notes. Now, Chris, what did you find good about the movie?
I like the music a lot. I really enjoyed the cinematography and the setting. It's a beautifully shot movie. Those are the first two things that really grabbed me. But I mean, I enjoyed the some of the action scenes in the movie too. They were very, let's say, realistic. It's a pretty graphic movie actually, even though there's not a ton of violence. And I liked like some of the bigger questions that it was trying to tackle, but we'll get into it a little bit later. But maybe they could have done it a little bit differently.
For me, what I really liked about the movie was it was beautifully shot, and I really liked they got some details correct that were really interesting, like the monastic tonsure. That's basically how monk's hair is cut. They clearly show Brother Giraldus with the Roman monastic tonsure. That's kind of the old friar tuck of the ringlet of hair around the outside, and then it shaved bald in the middle. And then if you look at the Irish monks, they have essentially just a narrow strip of hair cut off of the front of their heads. And I thought that was a really nice touch that they did with that aspect of it, that they clearly somebody was paying attention somewhere. And then I love that the use of language, they used Norman French, they used Irish Gaelic, and even a little bit of Latin on top of the English. And then, like you were saying, just a beautifully shot movie. And it was really, for me, at least as far as the film goes, I loved the acting from the very unsung French actor, Stanley Weber. I also liked one last thing is that they mentioned the at least disastrous for the Eastern and Western Christian relations of the Fourth Crusade, which was supposed to go to the Holy Land. in 1204, and this movie set in 1209. And that crusade, they didn't really want to wind up going to the Holy Land, so they went and sacked Constantinople. And I thought that was pretty cool that they brought that up.
Yeah, it is a nice little touch in the movie because the Norman Knights are presented as being kind of like invaders to Ireland, which they were. And one of the themes in the movie is like the, questionable motives of some of these soldiers. And it's nice that he's bragging at one point in the movie, the head Norman Knight, he's bragging about what happened at Constantinople. Like he thinks it was a good thing. And I don't think generally even people who lived at the time, maybe they really didn't understand exactly what was going on, but it was kind of like, even at the time, it was like a black stain on the Crusades where it's like, really, we just sacked a Christian city? Christian city?
Yeah, I could see it, that one character who said that, like he may not have thought it was a big deal, but it really was a disaster.
It's just generally embarrassing for the Crusaders, really. Like you're going there to conquer the Holy, but it shows too kind of the mission of the Crusades, how maybe initially when it first started, it was about stopping Muslim expansion and reacquiring the Holy Land for Christendom. And then over the course of the years, because there's obviously more than one crusade, those motives got muddled, basically. And to the point where, they were slaughtering, villages of Jewish people and had nothing to do with what was going on in the Holy Land. And at the end of it, they're sacking probably the greatest Christian city that ever existed, well, at least right next to Rome. They're sacking Constantinople, way worse than the Muslims never even did that. They did it later, but at the time, they hadn't even done that.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Well, when we watched the movie, when I watched it, I have to say that up front, I did not like the movie. I wouldn't say I didn't like it at all, but there was a lot of the parts of the movie that I did not love. And you came into it with a very different idea. What did you like about this movie on your first blush?
Like I said, like the cinematography, some of the big questions that they were asking, the music, especially it has like this music that kind of goes throughout the entire movie and it doesn't really stop. And when I was initially watching it, it reminded me of another movie that I really love that I think will eventually down the road we'll end up doing is Valhalla Rising. It definitely has that type of feel to it. And if anyone's seen Valhalla Rising, it has a very kind of unique feel to it, especially the monk who's from Rome or an ambassador from Rome. I really enjoyed his character because he asked some serious questions that maybe questions that we don't really have to deal with, but if you were living at that time, these would have been serious questions that a monk would have to deal with, or a Christian or a soldier or a bishop. He mentions, and I haven't seen too many movies of this kind of nature really deal with this. He asks, he mentions to one of the other monks, I can't remember right off the top of my head, like, well, who's going to pray? Like, these soldiers need us because they need us to pray for them, because in the service of doing what they're doing wicked things. But we need them to do these wicked things in the service of the church, in the service of God, in the service of what is good. And I know in the early church, this was a very big issue, and there was a lot of debate going back and forth, and eventually they ended up settling on something kind of like the just war theory. But I mean, it really does, tackle that main issue is like, should we be praying for these men? They're doing wicked things. Or should we be just leaving it totally up to God? But one of the other monks points out too that, I mean, we live in a fallen world. There's never going to be peace. There's just constantly war everywhere. And that was one good thing they did in the movie too, is the boy, the youngest monk of them all, has never left the monastery. So his first view of the outside world, and he sees, crazy feral pagans in the woods and Norman knights that like enjoy killing people, and this bishop that's from somewhere in Europe. I mean, this ambassador from Rome who's from somewhere in Europe wanting to take their relic. And you could just imagine his first view of the real world outside of this monastery, and everyone's either killing each other or trying to cheat each other or steal from one another. But he's seeing the world as it actually is, right? Since the fall of Adam.
Always for me when I'm watching a historical movie, and I'm not one to sit there and just completely pick apart a historical movie, but for me, there's kind of three legs of a historical movie. It's either got to get the history right, it's got to connect to something in history, even if it doesn't get exactly the details right, or it has to have a really compelling story, and it just so happens to be set in a historical time frame. And just for my money, it didn't do any of those. If it had done any one of those three things, I would have enjoyed this movie just based on the scenery in the background. But it missed on each one of those points. And I'll bring up a couple of historical things that it really botched. For one, the whole movie is based on that the Pope wants this relic, and they show a really, really, the very first scene out of the blocks is a stoning of Saint Matthias. And I want to say that they say in 60 AD or something like that. So they show an old man like actually get stoned. And they sort of show where Matthias dies, and then everybody gets swallowed up, all the persecutors. So what the Pope thinks is, the Pope back in Rome thinks that this stone, which the Irish monastery has as a relic, is going to somehow supernaturally either it's going to kill the Muslims in the crusade, and it won't harm. It's almost like a neutron bomb or something. That really stretches relic. Even relic and belief in the West, that in a lot of ways got wacky, that completely blows apart even the wackiness of relic veneration, like bordering on worship in the West, because it was really relics that were pieces, actual bodily pieces of a saint that were viewed as the most powerful. And because it was so hard to test the provenance of a relic, it almost was impossible to know what was really a true relic of something that a saint touched. So a rock that was a part of a stoning of Saint Matthias, it would be almost impossible. So the official church, and we kind of talk about the country church versus the cathedral church. And the cathedral church, the kind of the high-end church, thought all of this was bonkers, really. And a lot of this more strange relic veneration was really in the country churches.
Yeah, that's, from everything I've read, and I suggest everyone listen to your series on this, on the Celtic history too. Yeah, that seems to be the case, right? I mean, a lot of people, like the soldiers, might have felt like these relics that they were brought to the battlefield might do something. And I mean, and morale isn't something to just, do, like, not think much of. It's very important on a battlefield. If you have the relic of some saint's bones, or this rock that killed this saint, or this apostle in this case. But I don't know. I don't think the Pope actually thought that the rock had magical powers. Maybe in this, let's just say for the movie's sake, the Pope actually didn't think this rock had magical powers, or maybe he did. And then let's just say he didn't think that. And then this rock actually just happened to have magical properties.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things that the movie, I think when you start like peeling away the layers, the story becomes more preposterous no matter what way you take it. I mean, like, you could nitpick the whole thing, the whole idea of the movie, of that one monk is coming on this like most important secret journey to get this one relic is not, makes no sense on its face. The most important relics in Christendom, when they would move them from one place to another, it undergoes something called a translation, which just means moving it from one place to another. But there was a whole pile of pomp and circumstance that had to be done to move a relic from one place to another, because a relic was really supposed to stay where it was. And so you lose kind of the narrative of the movie right then and there, because that's just not how a relic would have been moved. One other really, really big thing to me is that this movie is set in the 1200s, but there's really none of the things that happened in this movie. It's kind of it's an agglomeration of 4 or 5 or 6 different events that happened long, long, long before the 1200s. For one thing, even the Norman conquest and invasion of Ireland was done before the 1200s. It took place mostly in the 1100s. So I guess you could kind of say that it was a mopping. They may have been doing mopping up operations, which you get this whole sense with the Normans, like they're fighting a Iraq/Afghanistan style insurgency. Did you get any of that vibe?
Yeah, or like the Romans in Spain, where like this is just a job that nobody really wants to do, and it's like it's terrible work, and it's like fighting over inches. And from my understanding, that's not really how it happens. And even before the Normans, the Vikings didn't really have much trouble in Ireland either. So
well,
I
and
mean,
then
they
a
fought
lot
some
of
battles.
yeah, and again, like they mention the Vikings in Ireland, and that's something that was for a good 400 to 500 years in the past, and they're talking about it like it had just happened. And I can see that there would be some institutional memory amongst monks, but still, it was a long, long time before that.
Yeah, but to me, when I first watched this movie, I thought like, oh, they're just going for kind of it's taking place in some historical setting, but all of this is supposed to be like an allegory or symbolism. And then I watched it the second time, and I came away. It's like, no, you're right. It's supposed to be taking place at this time. I think it would have worked better if it had been just different points in Irish history in and around this time, and it could have been taking, you know what I mean? Like it could have been
Yeah.
just kind of taking place at any time, and it's Ireland's history from 800 AD to where it's taking place now, like just using different historical events in a symbolic fashion. But that's not really what they do in the movie. It takes place at the time that it takes place.
Then that really leads us into the big scene where Irish pagans attack the train of monks leading this relic. And I just don't think that there were very many pagans still left, even especially like full blown woad wearing, blue painted pagans hiding in the woods. To me, that was another point that that did nothing for the story of the film, and it just made things more confused. It was almost like they figured, well, this is Ireland and it's Celtic, so we have to put in this pan Celticisms into the film. And how do you not have Celts wearing woad and tartans and all that? How do you not have them attacking Christians?
I mean, I'm a little bit more, I'll let my imagination run when it comes to stuff like this, where, like apparently the Druids were all kicked out of Ireland. But I mean, I would think there would probably be enough people that were true believers. And I mean, Ireland, there's a lot of remote places in Ireland where you could hide in the woods. And for the most part, the local authorities is just not worth the trouble. They're small enough groups. But at the time that this movie is taking place, no, they're all gone by this time. I'm thinking maybe 600 AD, 400 AD, well, obviously in 400 AD, but like 600 to like 800 AD. Yeah, I could totally see that. And maybe people wrote about it at the time, and stuff just gets lost. But I could see it lasting quite some time, because Druidism and Celtic paganism was around forever. It's not something that's just going to go away quickly. It probably hung on for a little bit, but by the time, like I pointed out, when this movie is taking place, I don't know. To me, it's a stretch that there would be some like feral pagans in the woods, but I mean, it's possible. I'm not going to dismiss it out of hand. It's just, I find it unlikely.
What I would think is, and I would really, again, encourage people to go back and listen to that series because Dr. McNamara is the true expert here. But the way paganism, I would think you would be a lot more likely to find maybe a farmstead or a really small village of a couple of farmers who are hanging on that are nominally Christian but are still pretty much pagan at heart. But to have a whole complicated, complex village, which clearly has a chieftain, is really preposterous to me, at least by the 1200, because you need to have a village that's a functioning village of that many people. You need to control land. And the Christian kings of Ireland and the Vikings who have long turned into Christians, they've been running the show. Nobody existed in the Middle Ages completely independent of everybody else. They were all very intertwined, and anybody who's going to have any sort of wealth, like wealth even as simple as having a house and a village, has to be tied in with the bigger world, even the bigger world of southeastern Ireland. And to be tied into that world, you had to be Christian. You weren't going to be some oddball pagans hanging out. But like you said, if it was 800 years earlier, even maybe as much as 500 years earlier, then maybe we're talking.
Yeah, just because it just seems more believable. It seems somewhat more believable. And I mean, me and you were talking about this during the week too. Like the Druids didn't write anything down. So all these traditions would have had to been passed down orally. But me and you were discussing, and I said, I find it hard to believe, this is my nerd talking. I'm like, I find it hard to believe that there wasn't like some stuff written down somewhere. And it was like the secret within the secret or what have you. And because we do have a little bit, not much of anything really, but we do have like a little bit of, how do you pronounce the word for the alphabet? Starts with an O-G, Ogham.
Oh, yeah, it's something like that.
Like we have like a little bit of stuff that they wrote down. Like to me, this is where if the movie had taken place, say 600 AD, I think it would have worked a lot better, or even 400 AD, where let's just say Rome had sent some missionaries over to Ireland and there was some Christianization that was happening and they had a relic there and they sent an ambassador from Rome from the church and, on orders from the emperor. And he had to cross through what's going on in Britain at the time with the Saxons coming over and they're bringing paganism back. And the emperor's desperate. We need this relic. The Rome's being God's empire is being attacked on all fronts, which wasn't an exaggeration. It was actually happening. And it was being attacked by heretics. And I mean, the Germans at that time weren't, some of them were pagans, but mostly the ones that were attacking Rome were Arian Christian, but which is a heresy. And there was probably a lot of pagans in there too. They weren't going to just kind of give that up right away. And we know that for sure because the Vikings were still pagan when they came along. So like, to me, that would have worked much better at that time because like, the whole Druid thing would have made a lot more sense because Ireland still would have been pretty much pagan at that time. And the relic, like this last desperate attempt, the super weapon relic that maybe the emperor thinks might change things around would make more sense. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the first thing that I would definitely fix is just moving it back to 500. Maybe 600-ish would have made a huge amount of difference. That if somebody from Rome came, and I think that could have brought up some interesting points that the Romans never did conquer or have settlements in Ireland or colonize Ireland. So you would have had a lot of conflict baked in right then and there. But in a way, to counter that point, they really did make that movie. And it was the King Arthur with Clive Owen from, I want to say about 2003 or 2004, which I think did that pretty well. And I think it did it better than this movie, Pilgrimage. You know, really that same major theme of conflict with the Roman church and with Rome and with the civilization, you might say, and the Celts. This movie, it was all just too muddled up to pull off what was essentially a chase story of these Normans chasing down with the they weren't even doing it with any sort of official what you might, I guess you might call it, official orders from the Normans either. It was the count or whatever, or baron's son, just trying to kill all of them for some reason because he was kind of like a proto-atheist. What did you read off of the son who was trying to kill all of them?
Yeah, like you said, I guess an atheist or somebody who doesn't really believe in God, or I don't know if I'd call him an atheist, because he does seem to think that this relic has some kind of power. Because he points out, like, I can just grab any rock and bring it back to Rome, right? And just say, this is the relic. I mean, he could. Like, what? Yeah. How would they know the difference? So he does seem to somewhat believe in this kind of relic, but it's almost like he has a perverse view of Christianity. Is the best way. Like, he seems to revel in the violence.
There's a couple more points before we can really talk about how we would change this up. And there's a couple of more points that I think are worth bringing up. One is, I mean, this is kind of a minor issue, but the monks in the early scene, they show them doing their mass in Latin, which would have been accurate. One thing they do, though, is they take communion in the hand, meaning that the priest puts the bread into their hand and then they pop it into their mouth. And that was not common until the 1960s, after some changes that were made at Vatican II, the Council of Vatican II. That would have been completely unheard of, even in a monastic house. So that's weird that they would get some other details straight, but mix that up. One thing that I thought that I liked how they used the different languages. What did you think about that first, about how they used English, Latin to a degree, Gaelic, and French?
I liked it. I thought it was especially the Gaelic. I would have just cut the English out, really. It would have lent some authenticity to the movie too, where everyone's speaking their native tongue. I think it would have made the movie better, but I guess that's like, if you're trying to sell the movie, it's hard to sell a movie that's completely there's no English words in it. But I mean, there's been a lot of successful movies that's the case. I mean, Passion of the Christ, Apocalyptico, Mel Gibson did 2 of them, and it can work. So, and you can sell it too.
Yeah, I mean, Mel did sell Apocalypto with having it all in a Native American language. I think that this would have been so much better to have, because they would have spoken basically what it defaulted to was, when the Normans were speaking to each other, they would do it in French. When the Gaelics were speaking amongst themselves, they would do it in Gaelic, the Irish. And then when anybody who didn't speak a common language, they just spoke in English. I think they should have just went to Latin. Maybe it would have been a lot harder to teach them Latin. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But I mean, like you said, Mel's done it in 2 movies. Maybe this movie didn't have the budget, or maybe they didn't think it would carry off, or people would think it's weird. Like, why are they speaking Latin? But in my mind, why are they speaking English?
My guess is the director just didn't, probably just doesn't have the pull with the studios that Mel Gibson has.
I mean, that could be, yeah.
The producers go to Mel. It's like, well, we need some English here. It's like, oh, well, I got a couple Oscars in the back there, and the biggest R-rated movie of all time, to tell you, no, it doesn't. So,
yeah, I think it really probably was a problem of just practicality tied in with that. That is a bold stroke to go all foreign language.
Yeah, especially for a movie that's essentially marketed towards, English speakers.
So then I get from one other thing that I think that is worth bearing is John Barenthal was in The Walking Dead. He was the Punisher, I believe, too, if I'm not mistaken. And he's been in a bunch of other movies.
Yeah, he was he played the Punisher.
and the Marvel universe. So you'd very much recognize him, and you might even recognize his voice. But in this movie, he plays a mute. His character is completely inexplicable to me. In one way, I was reading this person who really nerded out to the movie. Just right off the bat, he's completely dressed. Basically, what John Bernthal's the mute's character is, he's a layman laborer in the monastic monastery of the Irish. He can't speak, and they kind of treat him really rude, like he's dumb. Probably how anybody was treated in the Middle Ages who kind of fell outside of the norm. How do they develop his character? And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
I mean, he's at the monastery and he does like a lot of the grunt work because he's super strong and he's ripped. And then we find out later that he kind of washed up on their shores by accident from some battle, I assume, that he was at. And they took him in. And I guess through the monk's hospitality, he changed, that he didn't want to be a warrior anymore and decided that he was going to start learning the ways of these monks and become a good Christian. That's basically that's a storyline. But he's kind of represents, I don't know what he's like the muscle that they need. Like the monks want to look down at the other monk from Rome for saying like, we need these warriors to protect us. But in actuality, like these monks need the mute to protect them too, because when they do get attacked from the pagans, they all would have died 100% if the monk hadn't been there, which is one of the better scenes in the movie, in my opinion, is when that fight happens with the pagans and the big guy comes out with the bear thing on his head. And it's just great fight scene. And I mean, yeah. And then at the end of the movie, he lets the youngest monk get away, basically because he fights the Normans himself with no armor on, kind of going berserker like a Viking. And he says one word, and the one word is when he is right near the guy, he thinks he's got him dead to rights. He's stabbed him with that arrow pointy thing that rips out your guts.
Yeah.
He just says like, "Who are you?" And he says, "Hell." And then he bites his neck off and rips it off, which I thought was really cool. But I mean, I guess he's supposed to show that even these monks who kind of want to look down at the monk from Rome and then the Normans for fighting these battles and not living a Christian life. I mean, at the end of the day, they're not fighting people on crusades, but I mean, they're still using this guy to protect them. I mean, that's what I got away from it. And then in a sense that this mute is kind of, he's a demon, really. Like he's a demon. He has a demon inside him, and he's decided that the only way to like kind of hold this at bay, and he's trying very hard to hold this at bay, is to be as quiet as possible and live as boring of a life as possible in case with these monks. But through the course of the movie, that demon has to come out again. But this time the demon comes out, but he does it for a good reason. He's not doing it for somebody else's misguided reason.
Really, the whole thing, when they, in the end, every monk gets killed. The Tom Holland, the kid monk, just goes and chucks the relic into the water. And I just felt like we could go back and forth all night long about what the symbolism is for all of this. But I think they never gave us enough to really latch into of why they would do something. Like, why would he chuck, after all of that, all the monks are dead, everybody's dead, and then I'm just going to chuck the rock into the water? Like, where's Tom Holland going to go? It just seemed like they had no idea of what they really wanted the theme to be of this movie, because they couldn't have it getting all the way to Rome. That was not this movie. And so they just didn't really have a way to finish it. There was no ending that would have really worked. So then they just chuck the relic rock into the water, and that's that.
I mean, I guess you could say the monk from Rome, he jumps into the water going after the relic, and he dies chasing this relic, and that they warn at the beginning of the movie that if you're of a impure heart, you can't touch the relic. And I assume the idea is that he has an impure heart, and then this is the relic's power on him going into the water, and he drowns chasing this relic. I mean, I guess that would I mean, I assume that's the end. That's the ending that they're going for, right?
Yeah,
But
and
like you
along
brought up, like they brought up a lot of themes. We haven't even touched on the Irish like nationalism that's like throughout
yeah.
this entire movie. We haven't even touched it, and it's like one of the more, I guess, heavy-handed aspects of the movie. I mean, we can talk about or not talk about it. It doesn't really matter. But I mean, on top of all of the stuff that we've been talking about, there's a huge theme of Irish nationalism and throughout this entire movie.
Yeah, what are some of the ways that at least one that shows the Irish nationalism is that they're jealously guarding this relic, and it's to the point where they're hiding the relic. In most monasteries, they made a lot of money off of relics. And a poor monastery in the backwoods of Ireland, if they had this major relic, they would be promoting it to get pilgrims to come to their monastery and stay, give money, everything. Like that's how that economy worked. But like you were saying, for the Irish nationalism aspect, it's kind of saying like, oh, Rome and the Normans and the by proxy the English are trying to take what's Ireland's, and it was just very ham-fisted, and at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and the monk from Rome coming in and not respecting, they walk by this river, which is apparently infected by these types of fairies, and he just drinks the water and doesn't listen to the monks and just thinks they're stupid. And the Normans talk about like, oh, well, when you build a new garden, you have to cut down some weeds, the weeds being the Irish.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe from my understanding, the guy who made the movie is Irish. It was like it was made in Ireland. It's an Irish production. So, I mean, I'm not entirely surprised, but that's another thing that they try to tackle on top of this movie. We talked about a movie like way back in the day, Prometheus, that tried to tackle a bunch of themes. And I thought it Prometheus did it a little bit better than this. Like, don't get me wrong, I still really enjoyed the movie. Like I said, the cinematography is great. There's some serious questions in the movie, especially that the monks asked each other that I know you typically don't get out of this medieval type of affair. The acting for the most part is done well. It's just, to me, it's somewhat disappointing because I find it struggled to decide exactly what it wanted to be.
That really is when it boils down to it. When you have just too much going on in a movie, it's just hard to make a cohesive and a coherent story when you don't really know what you want the movie to be. I think you could watch the movie and just really ignore everything else and enjoy it as just a medieval sword and sandals action film. But I think that the movie had pretensions to do a lot more than that.
I find it was really trying to channel Valhalla Rising type vibes in it. But the reason Valhalla Rising works, in my opinion, is it doesn't take place at any time. It's like, yeah, there's Vikings, but it could be taking place at any time. And the main character in that movie, he's mute, and they just call him One Eye because he has one eye. There's a symbolism of Odin, and the whole movie is just allegory and symbolism, and it could be interpreted kind of any which way you really want to take it. I don't know. I think eventually we'll do that movie. I'm pretty sure you'll hate it, but I love it. Just because it is like that. It was definitely trying to channel that, and it didn't do it as well.
I don't mind that kind of movie, but they have to give us something to work with to draw those conclusions. And that's what it boils down to me, is that they just did not give us enough to really. I think it has to be given to us more by the director of what the director wants us to take out of it. And then we can go from there and take more out of it. But the filmmakers have to give us something to draw all these big conclusions out of. And this one just, that's where it really fell flat.
Well, and it kind of like did it like half and half, where it's trying to give you something, but then it's taking it away. And where I'll use Valhalla Rising again, like it doesn't really give you a ton other than like a bunch of images and some symbolism, and you're just supposed to let your imagination kind of go with it and just let the music and the lighting and some of the acting just move you in a different way. And that was the whole purpose of that movie. Where this one, it was trying to do a little bit of both, and it's still a good movie, but it just would have been better if they had just picked one or the other.
You know, it's one that fits that is 2001: A Space Odyssey. It didn't have a super complicated story in a lot of ways, but the stories connected through with the beautiful cinematography and with the thoughts that they built on to each other, and through each of the 3 acts or 4 acts, it all built together, and it left you a place to really, really think. With this, I think that the historical stuff that they didn't get right, on top of a story that really didn't go straight through, it just didn't leave me thinking after. Like, would you say that this was a movie that really, like, the next day and like the whole week after, you're thinking about it? I think as soon as I was finished with the movie and turned the TV off, I didn't really give it another thought.
I mean, when I first watched it, I enjoyed it, and I watched it another 2 times after and listened to some of the criticisms that you had, and I mean, I can't really disagree with them. We've been pretty much agreeing on the criticisms that we have of this film. And it's not like something like you pointed out, 2001: A Space Odyssey, where, I mean, if you love film at all, you'll watch that film and you'll probably find yourself thinking about it for the rest of the week, right? I can't say that I did that with this movie, no.
I mean, even Prometheus, I thought about Prometheus afterwards. And not even just thinking like, oh, we're doing a podcast on Prometheus, thinking about it. What was Prometheus really trying to say? It actually was thought-provoking in a way, where this, it just kind of, once it was done, it was a fun rollick. And I think they could have leaned in a lot more with the action and probably have just made a little bit more of an enjoyable movie.
Yeah. Just lean in right and have the mute be the focus, or, this silent warrior that doesn't say anything. And, he goes from shoveling dirt to ripping guys' heads off in 2 seconds, that would have been a fun movie. I mean, we get a bit of that. It would have been nice to maybe have a little bit more of it.
One thing I think they could have done with this movie is developed the mute in a little bit different way. I think that he should have, in a way, say he did wash up, they could have given him a little bit more of a background story. I think that his muteness, he shouldn't have been a mute. In the movie, at least how I took it, is that there was something physical that was stopping him from talking. Or I think he went into, and this is in Steve's alternate ending or alternate pilgrimage, he is not physically not able to speak. He takes a vow of silence in this monastery, and they just don't know anything about him except that he's turned to Christ, and he's going to whatever he left off before he went into the monastery. They're not going to ask any questions about. But through the Normans, and I felt throughout the movie, they started giving hints of this. Through the Normans, we learn that he actually was a Norman who killed Irish and who killed in the Crusades. And that maybe makes conflict with him with the Irish monks, along with the fighting conflict with the Normans. I think that could have made this a fantastic movie.
Yeah, and I would generally agree with that. To me, the one way to make the movie better would have been, like I pointed out earlier, just change the time that it was dealing in. Because if you're dealing with the years between 500 to like 800 AD, it's you can play a little wishy-washy with the historical facts on top of it, because at the end of the day, we don't really know a ton about it. We don't have a lot of written resources about it, so you can kind of like just kind of let your imagination work a little bit more, or as I pointed out, just have it. Yes, this is taking place somewhere in the past, and but it's all allegory and like metaphors for the struggle of Irish nationalism. You know, like the Rock is more it's the heart of Ireland, and it's the rest of Europe is trying to take it away. Or like to me that would have worked too. Maybe that would have been a little too ham-fisted, but there's ways you could do that without it being beating you over the head with it.
My final word on the movie, I would have to say it was entertaining. It was fun to watch. It missed on too many key aspects of what I really want from a historical drama. So I'm going to say it was a fail as a historical movie. Where do you leave off with it?
Yeah, it's a fail as a historical movie some of the reasons that we already pointed out. The feral pagan cult just is it's pushing it. If it was at a different time, I'd probably argue with you that yeah, there was probably were feral pagans around in Ireland at the time, but not at this time. Yeah, I would it fails as a historical movie. As a movie in general, I'd give it a 6.5, maybe a 7.